Ruth chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with those with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor, and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, and all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring out the garment that you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.' She replied, 'Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.'" This is the word of the Lord. Does anybody else enjoy watching sports at 2 a.m.? And I don't mean West Coast baseball games. I mean the stuff that's on ESPN2 at 2 a.m. No, it's just me. Okay, fine. In any case, I do. There's interesting stuff on 5 a.m. If you happen to wake up real early, which I don't, but if you happen to wake up real early, 5 a.m. there's oddball stuff on. You can find, and it's kind of fun to watch these sports that you don't know what they are exactly, and try to figure out what's going on. It's a little bit mysterious. You catch the Australian rules football, right? And polo. I've seen polo. And I don't mean the water polo like in the Olympics. I mean the kind that Prince Charles plays on horseback. I have no idea how polo works. I don't know what the rules are. Highlight. I once saw championship highlight. If you don't know what highlight is, it's a bunch of Mexican men with big hooked paddle things who hurl balls at each other. And I don't know why. or how it's scored, or what the rules are. I don't know, but periodically they shout at each other and everything stops. Then they hurl balls at each other again, and I don't know what's going on, but it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit of a puzzle, like a detective story. You can do that. You can watch polo or highlight or a handball. I saw handball on TV once. I didn't know handball existed. Apparently it's big in Taiwan. Who knew? But you can watch these things and try to figure out what's going on, but it's really hard. It's really hard to figure out why people, it's sort of mysterious. Unless you have somebody to explain the rules, it's all just a little bit random. People are happy, and then people are unhappy, and you don't know why. The story of Ruth. Actually all of Scripture can sometimes feel a little bit like that. But Ruth here, the 3rd chapter of Ruth in particular, can feel like that when you're reading it. Because unless you understand just a couple of really basic rules, actually, laws given to Israel, it's not totally clear what's going on here. Now, the story itself is easy enough to figure out, right? This is a story of Naomi, Israelite woman from Bethlehem, who with her husband Elimelech and her 2 sons fled Bethlehem to the land of Moab during a famine. And while they were in Moab, her husband Elimelech died, her sons Mahlon and Chilion died, and she was left there with 2 daughters-in-law, foreign girls, named Orpah and Ruth. Orpah went back to her family, but Ruth said, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, your God, my God." And so together, Naomi and Ruth trekked back to Bethlehem, back to her hometown. And when they got there, and this is why it's a story about the providence of God, right? When they got there, they discovered that it was, first of all, the barley harvest, so there was food there. And second, they discovered that Ruth went out to glean in the fields. That's just picking up grain after the harvesters. And she just happened to glean in the field of the kindest, most decent man in Bethlehem, who also just happened to be Boaz, who also just happened to be... name a kid Boaz, by the way. Bring that back. Somebody's got to name a kid Boaz. Nobody names their kid Boaz. I don't know why. He's a good guy. And yet people name their daughter Delilah. So name, any of you have the chance, name a kid Boaz. I'll work on that. I'll try to convince my brother to have another kid and name him Boaz. Before I got distracted with Boaz, just happened to wind up in Boaz's field. And oh, by the way, Boaz just happens to be a relative of Elimelech, her father-in-law. And everybody's excited about this. And if you don't know the rules, you can say, why? Why is everybody excited about this? I mean, I guess it's good to have your father-in-law's cousin there, but everybody's very excited about this. We read this in verse 1 here, that, hey, this guy is a near relative. Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? And then there's this mysterious business. I mean, Naomi tells her daughter-in-law to go down. Let's not mince words here. Wait till everyone's a little tanked. It's true. Find Boaz, lift up the corner of his robe, and lay down at his feet. And everyone assumes that he's totally going to understand what that means, and that means that she wants to marry him. Because that's how I asked Sarah to marry me. Didn't you? Crept up on her while she was sleeping. She said, okay. This is a little mysterious. But there's, and by the way, why? Why marry Boaz? Is it just because he's cute? I don't think so, because he's an older guy. No offense, older guys. Young women, attractive women, not into us. Although there are exceptions. I mean, I was just telling my wife yesterday, Sean Connery's 1,000 years old, and he's still handsome as heck. So, but most of us, right. So what's going on? Anyway, you need to know 2 things, only 2 things, to understand this story. The first thing you need to know is that there was a custom, there was a law in ancient Israel that it's usually called levirate marriage, from the Latin word for brother-in-law. And basically what it boiled down to was this. It provided that if a woman had a husband who died, and she didn't have any children, so she was married, her husband died, she doesn't have any children, that his brother would then take her as his wife. And this is all laid out in 25th chapter of Deuteronomy, if you're really curious, that the first son that they had would be the legal heir of the dead brother. And if that doesn't sound very familiar to you, don't worry about it, because it's only prescribed once in Scripture, in Deuteronomy 25. That's where the command is. And it's only described 3 times. The first is in the story of Judah and Tamar. I am not telling you that story. You're going to have to read that one on your own. The second, and if you read it on your own, you'll figure out why I'm not telling you that story. The second place it's described is here in Ruth. And the only other place in all of Scripture where you even get a hint of this Levirate marriage law is, of all places, in Matthew, the 22nd chapter, verse 24, where there are some Sadducees who come to Jesus. And you remember that the Sadducees were the ones who did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. And the Sadducees came to Jesus, and they were trying to trick him out. And they said, hey, Moses commanded that if a man dies without children, that his brother should marry his widow. And they said, now among us there were 7 brothers, right? And one died, and the second married, and so on and so on. And at the resurrection, whose wife will she be? And Jesus said, you don't understand either the power of God or the Scriptures, because at the resurrection, they're neither married nor given in marriage, but they're like the angels of heaven. That's the only other place that you read about this. It is a kind of an odd custom. And believe it or not, this law was not unique to Israel. You can find versions of this in Assyrian law, Hittite law. Practically speaking, it served 2 purposes. The first purpose, and to us anyway, it seems the most important. The first purpose is for the protection of the widow. No Social Security death benefits in Israel in 1200 BC. Also, by the way, usually women can't own property. And also, by the way, there are no food banks. There is no public welfare. And as a result, if a woman's husband died and she didn't have a son, a legal heir, to hold his property and get income from it, she was left out in the cold. And basically, we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, she had really usually 2 choices. One was starvation and the other was prostitution. What this law did was to make sure that that her husband's family can't just throw her out on the street. Right? If her husband dies, his family is required to take care of her, to provide for her. They have that duty. You would continue to be sheltered and protected by that household. You would be given a husband and, God willing, a son. Now, the second purpose of this law, though, is a bit harder to understand, but it's absolutely integral to the whole business, and that is the law was provided to perpetuate the name and the legacy of the dead husband. That, crucially, that included his property. Which would pass to the oldest son of the widow and his brother, that child would be the legal heir of the deceased. That's simple enough, right? Makes total sense. This is how I operate. But you have to know that to understand the story. The second thing you have to know to understand the story is the concept of a redeemer and what that means. A redeemer. You have to know, to start with, that property in ancient Israel was not really supposed to be bought or sold. It was given by the Lord. Remember that he promised that he was going to bring his people, his chosen people, into the promised land, into Canaan, and he was going to give them houses that they didn't build and fields that they didn't plant. And this would be their inheritance. Right? The land was given by God. And it was given, by the way, to certain tribes, certain places, and to certain clans within those tribes, and to certain families within those clans. And they were forbidden, because the land belonged to the Lord and was a gift, they were forbidden to sell it outright. You couldn't sell you had a piece of property, you don't sell it. Instead, what you could do is you could essentially sell the use of it for a certain number of years. And then, oh, by the way, every 49th or 50th year, it's not totally clear which, all that reverted. That was the year of the Jubilee. And at the Jubilee, all debts were canceled, all land returned to its owner, hereditary owner, all slaves freed, bless you. And that was provided for in the law. Now that sounds great, but let's say that you happen to be somebody like Elimelech. Elimelech clearly sold property in Bethlehem in order to pay for his flight to Moab. And after Elimelech died, his widow, she doesn't have the use of their property, right? Also, it was provided for that a person, and she doesn't want to wait 49 years, potentially. Also, it was provided that if a person happened to sell themselves into slavery, so these are all really acts of desperation, right? If a person happened to be so hungry that they sold themselves into slavery, in both those cases, whether it's the property or the person, it was the duty of the next of kin. And that could be the brother, that could be an uncle, it could be a cousin, it could be somebody else from their clan and their tribe. It was the duty of their family to buy them back. So let's say, for lack of any other illustration, Andy Scott, Israelite, is a famine. I'm incredibly hungry. I have a neighbor who has plenty of food for me and my family. In desperation, I sell myself as his slave and my family to him, understanding that we may not be free, but we won't die. It's then my brother's duty under Israelite law to redeem me. In other words, to buy me back. If I'm desperate and hungry and I sell my property, it is my brother's duty under Israelite law to redeem it, to buy it back so that it remains within our family. It's just the way it works. That's what a redeemer is, the person who buys it back. In Hebrew, the word is goel. It's a good word. Goel, a redeemer. And oh, by the way, the word is applied to the Lord. Right? The Lord redeemed his people from slavery in Egypt. The Lord redeemed their lives from the pit, the psalmist says. So it's not just a duty of Israel, it's what the Lord does. And here, but those two things together, the law requiring next of kin to marry the widow and the law requiring the next of kin to redeem property and people, those two things make total sense out of this story. Have a look at it. First verse of chapter 3 here. Naomi makes clear that she has a plan in mind, and this plan revolves around the fact that Boaz is the next of kin, or at least close to it. She says, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it should be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative?" And suddenly you understand why that matters, right? And so Naomi gives Ruth this script to follow, sends her on this mission. Go to the threshing floor when the men have finished eating and drinking. Wink, wink. And they have laid down. When Boaz lies down, you're supposed to go, she says, and lie at his feet. Now, when you're reading this story, I think it's natural. You think that what is Naomi doing here, right? Is this the NC-17 rated part of this story? What is she doing with her daughter-in-law? But Naomi was insistent here. She says, he will tell you what to do when you get there. And now, what's her motivation here? Is she indifferent to the danger, the very real danger posed to any young woman showing up at a party like this? And by the way, it works both ways. Either that Boaz would give in to temptation, or that Boaz would send her away in shame, right? Or was Naomi so sure of Ruth's goodness and Boaz's purity of motives that she knew they would treat each other with respect? Ruth was playing her own dangerous game here and going along with this, right? When Boaz awakes around midnight to find a beautiful woman asleep at his feet, he asks the obvious question, who are you? Now, you can kind of imagine that the second question is, what has just gone down here? Where have I been? What's been going on? It says, who are you? And the response is wonderfully restrained. She says, I am Ruth, your servant. As if he didn't already know the beautiful young woman gleaning in his fields, right? She continued and she said, spread your wings over me. Now, by the way, the word wings in Hebrew, it can also be translated as skirt. Why? I don't know. That's the way the language works. But so sometimes you'll read a translation that says, spread your skirt over me. And for you are a redeemer. The incredible thing to most of us is that Boaz understood that perfectly. He totally understood what she was asking. What she was asking him to do was to marry her, to redeem her family's persons and property, and to bear a son, to give her a son for her dead husband, who would be an heir to Elimelech. And Boaz compliments her, doesn't he? He says, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. See, Boaz gets it. He knows that the younger, beautiful women, they're not into us. Unless they're already married to you, which is the key. That's been my key. He says, bless you, my daughter, right? You haven't gone after these younger men, whether poor or rich. But, and here's where you really see Boaz shine. He says, there is a redeemer nearer than I am. You get the impression right here that there is nothing that Boaz would like better than to marry this girl. You don't meet a woman like this every day, especially if you happen to be kind of a middle-aged single farmer, which, by the way, is not, that also is not what you want to write in your personal ad. You don't meet, and this girl, look at her. In addition to being young and beautiful, she's good. Right? This is somebody who has been absolutely steadfastly loyal to her mother-in-law. This is somebody who has gone out and worked hard to provide for Naomi. This is somebody who has, by the way, we mentioned this last week, who took refuge, a foreigner who took refuge in the provisions of God's law. Because when she gets to Bethlehem, what does she do? She goes and gleans. She's obeying the law. She loves the Lord. Boaz cannot possibly ask for anything better. But here's the thing. Boaz also loves the Lord. And Boaz knows the law. And the law is that the Redeemer is the next of kin. And that there is somebody who is more closely related to Elimelech, and hence Ruth's husband, than he is. And he's got to go, and he's got to take care of this. And we'll see next week how that all it boils down. By the way, it ends in the transfer of a shoe. It's part of the law. What do we get out of this? Look, you get a little. This is a beautiful portrait. This is a beautiful portrait of purity and goodness. Right? When you ask, we live in a society that if you ask our society, what is beauty? The answer is always a malnourished 17-year-old, whether male or female. It's always a malnourished 17-year-old. I was a malnourished 17-year-old once, and I was beautiful. But it's very, very superficial, is it not? We have this incredibly superficial idea of beauty. And other things like goodness and purity, we don't even believe in those as a society. We don't believe that they can exist. Do we not? We instantly suspect anyone who talks about goodness and purity of being a hypocrite, a liar. We assume that everybody's on the take. We assume that everybody's cheating. It's not the case, by the way. It's not true. There are still in this world, there are still in this room, people who love the Lord, people who serve Him above all other things. But we don't appreciate properly the beauty of that love and that service, that what in fact is most magnificent is again, not a malnourished 17-year-old. No offense, malnourished 17-year-olds, wherever you might be. Not a malnourished 17-year-old, but character. Right? Purity of heart. A love for the Lord. This is what Christ calls us to. Secondly, we see here a hint, and we'll see more fully next week, of what is really involved, what it means to say that Jesus Christ is our Redeemer. And we discover that it's not just a matter of, well, He forgives me. No, it's that He pays the price to buy you back, to bring you back into the people of God, to give you an inheritance that you had lost, to provide for you a future. And it comes at a great cost. That's what redeeming is. Praise God. Amen.